Hello, my name is Samantha Henriksen, and today's lesson is about the elements of art. So, there are 7 elements of art, and these are the foundational elements that guide the art making process. There's not a specific order that they go in, but I ordered them in a way that I think is easiest for beginners to learn about, and also in a way that where hopefully you can draw connections between them. So the order this lesson is going to go in is line, shape, form, value, color, texture, and space. And I also had a few learning objectives for today. The first is to learn the 7 elements of art and how they are used, and to understand the differences among them. And I just think that is important because there are some of the elements that are frequently confused with one another. And so hopefully by the end of this lesson, you will have a better understanding of their differences. So the first element is line. And I just wanted to briefly talk about the different types of lines that there are. So I drew a few examples here on this slide. So we have curved lines, straight lines, bold lines, and we can even think about them directionally as well. So diagonal, vertical, horizontal, and things like that. And this might seem pretty straightforward, but it is worth talking about because line is typically where most people are going to start a drawing, is by drawing some kind of line on the paper. And I just wanted to illustrate that, from the get-go, we're already making choices about what kind of lines we want to use. So in these next few slides here, I'm going to talk about a few different ways that line is used in drawings. So the first is gesture drawings, and this is a sketching method that artists use to quickly capture the essence of what it is that they're drawing. So it's most commonly used with drawings of the human body, however, it can be extended to other subject matter as well. This technique is nice because it quickly conveys movement as well as weight of the object or person that you're drawing. So the middle drawing is a perfect example of a gesture drawing, I think, because it accurately shows the position and movement of the body as well as where the weight lies, which is on that right leg. So the last kind of line that I wanted to talk about is implied lines. And this is basically the idea that our eyes read the drawing as having a line where in reality there was none. So looking at the right-hand example to start with, this is a stippling, which means that it was drawn only using dots. So when we think about it, it can't have any lines because they're all individual circles, individual dots. But let's look at the hairline, for example. The dots are placed close enough together to the point where it creates the illusion that there is a line there. And this is done in other parts of the face as well and drawing overall. But this is just one way that implied lines can be used in art. Another way, going over to the left-hand example, this artist uses value to create implied lines. So there are a few clear defined lines in this drawing. However, for the most part, it is pretty blurry and undefined. So if we think about the hairline again, if we look at the hairline again, you can see that there is no clear definition as to where it starts. So the value and the blurry effect is used to imply that there is a line there. The second element is shape. And my definition of this is a flat 2D outline. So when we think about shape, the first thing that probably comes to our mind is geometry or geometric shapes such as a square, circle, or octagon. Or maybe it's other kinds of common shapes like a star or a heart. But I also want to stress that shapes can be organic. So I added in this picture of different kinds of leaves because if we look at their outline, they are all different and organic. It's not using straight, clear-cut lines in like geometry or perfectly curved ones as well. Shapes are important to art for many reasons, but I think they are particularly important because when you're working in a 2D form, such as drawing or painting, it can be very difficult to describe your subject matter without using any kind of shape. Um, But similar to the way that gesture drawings are a good sketching tool or a good beginning to a drawing, shapes can be used in a similar way. Um, so I like to think of them as pieces of a puzzle when they are used in combination to begin a drawing of your subject. And it's a great way to quickly draw your subject using minimal detail. So this is just one example of how shapes can be used in art. The next element is form, and this one is often confused with shape. So the difference between shape and form, let's think back to the definition that I gave, was that shape is a flat 2D depiction of an object, whereas form is a 3D depiction of an object. So we can do this with a 2D utensil such as a pencil or paint, but it can also be and is probably better described through a physical, a more 3D material such as clay. But the big difference is that form is depicting the object more accurately to the way it would look in real life. And this is hopefully a part of the lesson where you're starting to realize the interconnectedness of these elements and how they are used in combination with one another. So for me, form is achieved through value on a 2D surface. Value is what contributes to the more lifelike features. So hopefully the difference between those two is clear for you at this point. And then on this next slide here are a few examples of some organic forms. Similar to shape, it does not have to be this clear-cut shape like a square or like a cube, but here are more flowing organic forms done in ceramics. The next element is value, and this just refers to the lights and darks and everything in between, the range that a color has. So this top picture here is an example of a value chart, which may be something that you have made before if you've ever taken an intro to art course. And these are typically monochromatic, which just means using one color. So the top one would be black, and this bottom one here is green. But while we're thinking about value, I wanted to pose the question, what do you think is the main outside contributor to an object's range and value? And that might be a little bit of a wordy question, but I just mean, what is it that makes the highlights and the shadows of an object? And you might have guessed it by now, it is the light source. So here in this still life, it looks like the photographer or artist is using a lamp as their light source to create the range and value of the fruit. So these next few elements I'm going to go through pretty quickly. So the first one is color, and this is something I feel like we all learn at a pretty young age, how to mix the primary colors yellow, blue, and red to create the secondary complementary colors green, orange, and purple. And color is important to art for a lot of reasons, but it really depends on what kind of art form you're working with, um, as to whether color matters or not, and whether it matters to you as the artist. The next is texture, and this can be done with both 3D and 2D art forms. And I wanted to focus on 2D for this slide. So if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, this is an example of the different kinds of textures you could create using a pen. And some of the textures range from using small circles, which would be a shape, to X's, and this is called cross-hatching. And even at the very bottom, there is an example of a stippling, which we already talked a little bit about, using only dots. But hopefully you can tell that repetition is really important to texture, because it is that repeated mark making that when you step back from your piece, you can see the texture. And last but not least is space. And this just refers to the physical environment that your subject matter is taking place in. So this could be somewhere outside or somewhere inside. It is just referring to the physical environment. And so there's different layering that is happening when we are depicting space. So starting with the foreground, this is going to be what is typically the most clear and has the most detail. This is what you would want your viewers to pay most attention to. And then moving to the midground, this is just that middle area, still perhaps in a lot of detail, but a little farther away from the eye. And then finally is the background, which is going to be what is furthest away from the viewer's eye and in much less detail than the foreground. So the background would typically have some kind of blurring effect to show that it is receding into space. Quickly, I wanted to show you a real-life example of this. So this is a George Seurat painting that you may be familiar with, but we're going to go over the fore, middle, and background real fast. So the foreground, I believe, is everything that is in this shadow here. So this woman in the very front, dog, the man on the ground. These are what are the objects that are in the foreground. And then the middle ground, I believe, goes from where the shadow ends to that tree in the middle that looks like a Y. That I would say is the middle ground. So it's a little farther away from the eye, little less detail. And then beyond that is the background, which is in much less detail and a lot further away from the eye, using things like perspective to make the people and other subjects recede into space. Lastly, I wanted to talk about how space can be used as a drawing tool. So, there's this thing called negative space, which refers to the space in between or surrounding what you're drawing. So, if we look at the example at the bottom here, going from left to right, in the first image, there are two faces that are a silhouette in black, and the space in between them is white. So then if we go over to this next slide, you can see that the colors have been inverted. So how this can be used as a tool is if you were to draw the space surrounding the faces rather than drawing the faces themselves. And that is the end of my lesson. Hopefully you have learned something today about the elements of art and how they are used, as well as their differences. Thank you.